Okay. There we go. Jordan Hall, thanks for being here, man. Um,
Where
first
are
and
you, by the way?
I am
Where's
in
here?
Texas. I'm in Texas, which is your home
Where?
state,
My home state. So
Waco.
now Waco. Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So Central Texas. I am. It's funny. We actually did a switch. I'm from North Carolina.
Oh,
So I
tag out.
hail from Pinehurst. It's a small town, probably 3 hours roughly due east of you.
I think I may have driven through there on the way to not Greensboro, but in that region. High
Mm-hmm.
Point, maybe. I can't remember.
Yep. Yep. You would go very close. So yeah, South Central North Carolina is my home, but made it to Texas now for the last 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
I grew up in the hill country northwest of San Antonio.
Okay. Beautiful.
Actually, where that flood was actually,
Yeah.
and then I went to Texas A&M, so I know
Okay.
Waco a little bit. I've been through Waco maybe 30 times.
Yeah, yeah. I've been working at Baylor the last 2 years. That's what my wife is also a Baylor grad, so that's what kind of brought us here.
Yeah.
Um, well, man, firstly, I've heard you say before that you are open to these conversations because you feel God has been calling you to be open to these conversations, and so I think a fitting way to start is just to say thanks be to God for putting that calling on your life right now, and
Yeah.
thanks to you for being open to it. Um, so for some context and background, I reached out to you a month ago, roughly a month ago, I think, after I jumped on a live stream of Paul Vanderklay's, the Friday live streams that he does with the Estuary Protocol, which I believe you're familiar with. I think you,
Yeah. I've done
yeah,
the estuary thing twice live, like in real time.
okay, yeah. So it was actually my first time. It's a bit serendipitous. I have been listening to Paul. Kind of went through the typical pipeline, you could say, from listening to Jordan Peterson circa 2017-18 to Pajot and Vanderklay and Vervaeke, that kind of typical path. And yeah, I've been listening and maybe commenting here and there for a while, but really just trying to more absorbing the content, less participation. And then, but always looked for opportunities too, just never, seemed to never line up. My job's a little bit crazy.
Mm.
I've been a college tennis coach for years. And so always felt like, oh man, I'd love to jump on here, but I don't have the capacity to. And so a few weeks ago or a month ago, serendipitously opened YouTube and for the first time ever, kind of caught Paul's link right after he'd posted. I was like, oh man, there's a spot. So jumped on. It was the day before, and the morning of the live stream. This is about 2 days after you had tweeted, which I'll read your tweet here in a little bit to kind of set the stage. But you had quote tweeted, regarding sort of your answer to my generation or the younger generation's um, maybe plight of a lack of direction from the boomers, I guess was the original tweet. Although I think that, your tweet took it much further. And so that was sort of in the air in my mind. In the morning of the live stream, I was reading my Bible and just kind of came upon the St. Paul's letter to the Colossians and was just reading through it, totally unrelated, and felt like, man, there's a lot of concordance between what Jordan's tweet that's rolling around in my head and what I'm reading here on the page. Oh, and I'm going on this live stream today, so that would seem like a good thing for me to suggest as my pitch, and we'll see if it catches the attention of the other folks. So it did, and there was some cool relations between my pitch, which was basically, hey, let's dig into Jordan's tweet and talk about the themes that he's speaking about, and a couple of the other folks' pitches, which were centered around family and community. Laura, I believe hers was about the fertility crisis. How do we get people to have more kids? And so there's a lot of concordance between our pitches too, but mine was to talk about your tweet was chosen as the best frame for the conversation. And so we spoke and we had a great conversation, but we got a little stuck on, is the wartime frame the proper frame to talk about the issues that the original tweet was maybe poking at, but that you really elucidated? So we got stuck on, is the wartime frame apt or is it not apt, and kind of a little bit almost debating that, rather than what I think was the most interesting, and useful part of your little mini essay there, which was actually kind of the back half. Although I do think the wartime framing is apt, and was probably a big reason why I felt the concordance between what I was reading in scripture and the tweet. I do think there's a lot more there to be uncovered, and so that's why I reached out to you. Figured why not go to the source and let's have a chat about it.
Nice.
So I think it could be useful to do two things. Read just a few short passages from Colossians and Ephesians that I kind of parsed out a little bit, and I think St. Paul will forgive me for mishmashing those two together. And then read your tweet, and then we can just kind of see where it takes us.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay, let's see. I'll pull up this note here. Okay, so Colossians kind of starts with Paul laying out the theology of Christ and his dominion over creation, and then we'll kind of pick up there and kind of go back and forth a little bit. So he says, "So then, just as you have received Christ Jesus as Lord, continue to live your lives in him, rooted and built up in him, strengthened in the faith as you were taught, and overflowing with thankfulness. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world rather than on Christ." And then skipping forwards, "For you were once darkness, and now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light, for the fruit of light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. And find out what pleases the Lord. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. It is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes light. This is why it is said, 'Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you.' Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Finally, be strong in the Lord and his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." And I'll finish with this last from the end of Colossians. "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you, and over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Let the peace of Christ reign in your hearts, since as members of one body you are called to peace. And be thankful. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, singing with gratitude in your hearts. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him."
Amen.
Amen. I'm like, you could almost just stop there. Okay, we're done. Okay, and then I'll read your tweet, which is, it's funny to go from that to even saying the word tweet.
The tweet from Paul to the
yeah, straight from Paul writing this from prison to us on our iPhones. So okay, I'll skip I'll skip the generational frame because I don't know, and we could banter that about if we need to, but I think that I'll start a little bit further down where you say, "Here's the frame. Y'all are at war," referring to younger generations or Americans coming up, you might say. "It's a very different kind of war than the kids storming the beaches at Normandy faced, but that is the right mindset. You need to be on a wartime footing, else nothing else will make sense. Now, the best way of thinking about your war is that it is a spiritual war, of which fifth generation warfare is a big part. The enemy isn't going to kill your kids. He is going to get you to do that, or get them to kill themselves, or cause you to never have kids, or cause them to choose mere survival over capital L life. Get the sense of it? In a way, the boys at Normandy had a simpler task. The enemy was over there, and he was really trying hard to kill you. In your war, the enemy is everywhere and nowhere. He's between you and your wife, you and your parents, you and your friends, between your mind and your heart, especially between your heart and God. It's tough to face things like just getting a decent job, being able to own a home, being able to raise a family as war, but that's the way it is. No parentheses human authority is coming to save you. Nothing is fair. Every legacy and institution is corrupt and incompetent. You have to muster a subtle quality of intense courage, find allies who are capable of being brothers in arms, and begin to figure out how to fight this fight. Then win it, fully accepting that death, or worse, is a perfectly plausible outcome. My advice from whatever wisdom I've acquired: focus locally. Flesh and blood is more trustworthy than virtual. The net is useful, but don't over-index. If you can build a community of 100 who are made of the right stuff, you'll have a real chance. Hyper-local. Get yourself sorted, physically, psychologically, relationally. Your integrity is non-negotiable. A man without integrity is less than worthless. Connect with other functional communities and help each other. Sometimes it's operating doctrine, sometimes technology, sometimes it will require physical presence, referencing your experience in Western North Carolina after the hurricane. And then finally, cultivate discernment and gift your attention wisely. Figuring out who is better at telling more meaningful truth and not being dragged down rabbit holes is life and death. Again, a man without integrity is less than worthless. Go to church. If you don't have a church worth attending, find one or start one. You're going to need God. Here's the good news. These are the bad times. If you become strong men, you will be the ones who create good times. The last thing I would add is and really maybe what caught my eye the most was your reply.
Uh-huh.
A wonderful reply to like a comment that I don't know that was like, they didn't expect to get the reply you were giving them. Trying to find, essentially, I don't remember what the reply was, but it was saying 21st century problems require 21st century solutions. And your reply was something to the effect of, the entire frame of 21st century problems / solutions is wrong, and it's a 20th century frame, and the proper frame for 21st century problems is eternal solutions. If I'm wrong there, I couldn't find it, but I believe that was the gist of it. And so that really caught my eye. And I guess to just kind of finish the frame, the reason why this all really spoke to me is, from a little background on myself, I'm 28. I got married 3 years ago, came to Christ 5 years ago now, 5.5 years ago. It's not that long. Moved to Dallas here to Texas, got married to my wife, who we met at church in Dallas. And then recently, so 4 months and a week, we had our first child, our daughter, who, congratulations, by the way. I know that you just had a new child. And I lost my job 2.5 months ago, in what I thought was a very secure situation. And throughout all this time, as I mentioned, I've been listening to this kind of corner of the internet. And over the last 1.5 years, I would say very specifically, I've really just caught the tune of what you've been talking about as you've become more public, both your conversion story, which I think is fascinating, but specifically as you've dialed into the themes that we see in this tweet of localism, community, the way you've talked about your church experience at your local church as one of communion, and how that relates to just everything from parenting to education, and all the above. And so, that paired with kind of my personal situation and being someone who's on the receiving end, maybe of the audience you were talking to in your tweet, just made it all really, really salient. And so, I don't know if anything kind of first pokes out to you. I know that's a lot, of course, with the scripture and your tweet and everything, but I thought that between the wartime framing and the way that St. Paul goes from this really, really high theology of Christ as our representative, as, being the head of the body of the church, all the way down to the really, really granular of, husbands, submit to your wives, sacrifice yourself for your wives, submit to your husbands, children, listen to your parents, like the very, very granular of what makes up these the communion, the life of these church communities that he's writing to, right? He's writing to communities, not individuals, but he has directions. Let the peace of Christ reign in your hearts, right? Your individual or hearts as persons. So that's kind of where I felt a lot of the concordance. And, I just thought we'd see what strikes a note with you.
So there's like maybe 4 things that I'm not quite clear where is the right one to kind of focus on. So let me just lay them out.
Yeah.
One is the question of what do we mean by the concept of war? What does that even mean? Mm-hmm. The second is, okay, what do we mean by spiritual war? The third is, what is the relationship between these ideas and discipleship? Mm-hmm. And the fourth would be something like the kingdom. What does it mean for us to be thinking about? Let me see what the right way of putting it. Oh, I'll just put the kingdom out there as a way of putting a tab, and then we can see where we want to go. So, do any of those seem we're going to do a mini estuary? I've got 4 pitches. Yeah. I'm 4 phases. It's me 4 times, 4 different pitches.
Yeah. I think the first 2 go pretty well together. Definitely what this means for discipleship, I think, is probably the one that seems most salient, but it may be at least a short preamble into the first 2 and defining what those mean could be useful before jumping into what this means for discipleship.
Nice. Okay, so that sounds good. So what we'll do is we'll run through the first 2, settle into the third, and then that'll vector us towards the fourth.
Yeah.
So the first is to say, skin in the game, maximum skin in the game. Well, there's 2 characteristics when you're engaging in war. One characteristic is it's for all the marbles. Right? So it's extremely serious. It's I think maybe a thing to put forward is that we've been raised in a really, really remarkably lazy and cowardly context. We're by far the laziest and most cowardly human beings that have ever been developed. We face no duress. Even our crises would be considered a good day for almost anybody who's ever lived. And the point I want to bring forward is this, which is, but that's not how life works. Life is, in fact, actually for all the marbles, and not just particular moments in life. We tend to live life in a situation where we take the foot off the gas for most of the time, and then something important happens, and we try to focus, right? We try to kind of raise to the occasion. But the notion of war is that when you are at war, everything starts to line up. Everything becomes very strictly organized in a very straightforward telos. And part of it, of course, is the pressure of the adversary. If you do not have an adversary who is very, very committed, fully committed to your complete defeat, then you're not at war. You may be there's a variety of different things that might be happening, but that's not what's happening. A hurricane is not war.
Yes.
And of course, the point is that this combination creates a tremendous degree of tautness. You get pulled very tight. You begin to notice that every single thing has to be taken as if it matters, because your margin of error gets smaller and smaller as your adversary becomes more and more capable of defeating you, and the consequences of defeat are more and more profound. And that's the thing, right? And so the end of war, like the last step, is ultimately either you are victorious or you are dead. And I mean, the word dead here can extend to cover a large scope of things, right? The key thing is that you have been defeated, and you are now subject to the hierarchy and the value structures of some other will. That's the key idea. And so some part of you is dead. Something that you care about is dead. Otherwise, there would never been a war in the first place. You would have just, changed your behavior. Okay, so that's what that frame ultimately grounds in. And I guess one thing else to put up there is there's a lot of things that may be assumed to be imported by that frame, but most of them are, in fact, coming from a lack of awareness of how war works. So, for example, in the contemporary environment, if what was that guy's name? Chariglione, the Italian kid who shot the healthcare executive.
Yeah, I can't remember his Italian last name, but yes.
Yeah. You're not fighting war, right? You may use a logic of we're at war and therefore this is justified, but the point is you're being very, very, and I want to be I want to use the kind of morality at the level of war, which is you're going to lose that war. That is a stupid way to fight war. It is a way to fight war stupidly. Mm-hmm. And stupid in the context of war is also immoral because it just means that you'll lose. Mm-hmm. And therefore everything you value has been sacrificed on the basis of your own stupidity. So what does it mean to fight war wisely? And I'll use wise even more, wise includes within it something like effectively. So this is then when I started importing that notion of the 5th generation warfare frame. Mm-hmm. And then we'll blend over to spiritual war, because one of the things that happens is as we have moved forward in the art of war, we have more and more spiritualized the way that we go about waging war by necessity. So, and in fact, I wrote an essay about this. It was called The War on Sense Making. Mm-hmm. At the moment at the end of World War II, with the kind of mushroom clouds coming up in Japan, we had reached a point where kinetic war had been both maximized and had in some sense come to an end, meaning we'd reached the edge of what could be done by virtue of just blowing the other guy up, because now we have mutually assured destruction. And if you try to blow the other guy up, he can blow you up and nobody can win that war. Okay. So what that required, though, is kind of like a pressure cooker, meaning we're still going to be waging war. And this is important to keep in mind. There's no other way around it. Well, how do we do that? So we had to become more subtle. So the Cold War is this war of spies and propaganda. And what it does is it almost like, think about it as, this is the way it's always been, but it forces it to become more refined. It squeezes the front, the location where conflict occurs, into every possible location. Mm-hmm. The Chinese have, in fact, formalized this with what they call systems war, which is just to say what I just said. So the technique of systems war is you probe in what might even appear to be arbitrary locations. Let's try cyber war here. Let's try influencing filmmaking there. Let's try embedding backdoors in television and laundry machine chips, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And just watch and see where you're able to get more advantage. Right? So think of this as a very fluid, modular thing that doesn't have any particular preconceived notion of where and how war is waged, but rather is able to deploy continuously. But ultimately, yes, recognizing that there's a sense of who is on each side. Mm-hmm. But as you accelerate through the 5th generation warfare, even that begins to break down, because, of course, when you're engaging in maximum psyops, part of psyops is obfuscation of identity. And who exactly, plausible deniability, and even engaging in actions where the causation becomes diffuse. Have you heard of something, what is it called? I heard about it from Bruce Sterling a long time ago. I think it has a technical term now, but the notion would be something like, let's say I want somebody dead. Mm-hmm. And what I do is I produce a propaganda field that would have the statistical likelihood of provoking some random schizophrenic to decide that that's the guy he needs to take out to get his craziness to go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no connection, no causal linear connection between me and the actual event. And yet there is a connection between me and the actual event.
Yeah.
That's, but what you begin to see is you begin to see causation becomes diffuse, identity becomes mm-hmm. diffuse. This is why I said the centerpiece, as you move through the arc of 5th generation warfare, it actually becomes isomorphic with what we would have called spiritual warfare in a very beautiful way, a very powerful and confusing way. Who are you? What are your values? Like if the end of the day, if to defeat you in war is to basically say, I now subordinate your values to my values, if I can get you to become confused about what your values are and to lose track of what you value or even what it means to value anything, then that's a perfectly great way to do it. And maybe actually much more effective than trying to blow you up. Because if I charge at you with a machine gun, I may harden your values. I may harden your commitment. And if I fail to really thoroughly kill you, in some time you'll come back and you may mm-hmm. be subtle about it. Think Rome and Greece. Right? Rome ostensibly conquered Greece, but in many ways, Greece conquered Rome through the another door. So, and this is, I think, the point here is I think this is where we are. Right? So we're in this really interesting circumstance that, and diagnostically, we are at war, and perhaps it's proper to say that we have always been at war. This is back to the Paul reference, and we'll connect back up to spiritual war. Mm-hmm. But the materiality of that war has become more and more palpable. And so, okay, so now let's shift to Roman numeral 2, spiritual war. And I noticed that, for example, Pajot and Vervaeke have been having some, and Pajot, but in particular, Pajot have been having some really interesting ways of helping to make clear the meaning of some of these terms.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what is spirit? What is spiritual being? And what is angel?
That
Because
conversation they just had recently was really, really good on that.
Really good, because what we have is an image of a spiritualized or supernaturalized or fantasized version of the ordinary reality that we tend to see.
Yeah.
So say, okay, an angel is like a mailman, but with wings and invisible. Oh, okay. That's not what we mean. But the problem is we don't have it. Like, that's how we played it out. Like, we say, okay, demon is like a bully, like a physical bat, or like a really bad bear who is, smarter than a bear, but basically looks like that, but dark and mostly invisible, comes out of the shadows, something like that. It's special effects. It's a very special effect heavy image.
Mm-hmm.
But the point I believe that they were making, and Pajot has been making, is that there's actually just one world, and in that world, these concepts are real, and in many places very commonplace. As we talked about, like the gargoyle and the notion of the edge. I think his thing on Superman was very nice. Like this idea of, hey, what does it mean for somebody to be from the outside and to bring special capabilities to the inside? And is he a spy? Is he an agent? Or is he, in fact, a hero? Somebody who is serving the inside, but bringing special knowledge from the outside. That's a very clean way of describing a particular archetype that is spiritual, right? So now we're beginning to kind of hammer on the notion of reconnecting to Paul. All right, so now let's reconnect to Paul, and also kind of ring the bells on this notion of fifth generation warfare vis-a-vis Gen Z. Sorry, are you Gen Z? Yeah, I guess you're the oldest,
I am,
the youngest possible millennial.
I'm the youngest possible millennial, or you could say oldest possible Gen Z. I'm the youngest of 3 brothers, and so I would say I'm more millennial than Gen Z, only by the nature of being the youngest in my family. I think if I was the oldest, I would classify myself as Gen Z.
But yeah, I think that's a reasonable way of doing it. So when we move to sort of between Roman numeral 2 and Roman numeral 3, so I'm going to bring discipleship into it as well. The commitment, the requirement, and the actual diagnosis is that we are fully immersed, and have always been and shall always be fully immersed in a spiritual war, which is to say, very simply, everything matters. Every choice you make, every action you take, every breath, every word is ultimately laden with consequence. It's either towards God or away from God. There is no neutral and there is no relevant. Well, that's a wartime footing, right? That's that mentality of full skin of the game, full stake. And by the way, profoundly pitted adversary who is committed to kicking you in the wrong direction and is waging fifth generation warfare, which is to say waging warfare through any means available. Okay. And so if we say, oh, well, the actual ordinary proper footing of a Christian in discipleship is war. And I should say, just to harken back, and not stupid war. Let us not endeavor to wage the war against powers and principalities stupidly. And a very simple example of that would be to try to wage that war on our own behalf, or even just using our own purposes, our own power, our own capabilities, because we'll lose that war, because the adversary we're facing is infinitely more capable than we are at every one of those characteristics. They would be given one very specific needle to needle. Yeah, I have the needle to thread, which is to be on the cross. And then there's a very specific way to participate in the war that is being waged. Now I can actually shift it. The war that is ongoing. It may, in fact, just be the nature of the world into which we are thrown. And so it gets very narrow. It gets very tight. Now what I'll do is I want to flip back to the first and then flip over to the fourth. It kind of juxtapose them, because this is I think kind of the big point. It's and I said this sort of thing a while back, even before becoming a Christian, which was, for a very long time, thousands of years, there has been a conversation about the end of the world, and also a conversation about the necessity of repent and to sin no more. But now the material conditions are catching up with the spiritual proposition, meaning there is very little choice left but to fully commit yourself to discipleship. And I would say, in fact, there is no choice left, but there's a slack, a few years where you can pretend otherwise. You will be consumed, body, mind, and soul, by AI if you are not able to cleave utterly to Christ. For example, how do you go about bringing together a group of people who are able to hold together with fellowship in the context of the turbulence and the tribulation that is simply already upon us and is going to increase over time under every possible scenario? Well, there's only
that's the question.
That's the question, and the answer's in the book. Right? This is the thing. We could have gotten away with, and particularly in the context of this burst of neo-Nephilim,
Yeah.
called the technological revolution, the industrial revolution, right? And the burst of wealth and the burst of material capacity and the burst of sorcery, like power, our ability to express our will in the world that happened from 1500 until yesterday. We were able to be inveigled to believe that under our own power, we could achieve the values that we value, and we could, in fact, discern and maintain those values. Mm-hmm. And it turns out all three of those are false.
Yeah.
In reverse order. We actually have lost track of what values are. We've lost track of the ability to even distinguish between right values and wrong values for the most part in our culture. And as the wheels come off the bus and as the structures of technology, and I would say, like, General Motors is a structure of technology. Right? There's a variety of different variations in the word techne, but you can see within that entire portfolio, as the wheels begin to come off of all of those different variations, we realize, which, by the way, again, has always been the case in every individual life and throughout the whole of history, that we are utterly exposed to the working of the adversary. And so this is in some sense very beautiful. But the circumstance you find yourself in forces you to realize what Paul has been articulating. It forces you to say, whoa, yeah, I guess that's true. There is only one possible place. Mm-hmm. There's only one safety. There's only one peace, and there's only one way. And it's funny. And this is not like, I'm not saying that doctrinally. I'm saying it practically. It's like, trying to think, very, very much the metaphor of you're walking up a mountain path, or was it Karhadras in Lord of the Rings?
Yeah.
And they think, well, no, we'll go up the mountain, but you can't. The path is the way is shut. So we have to go through Moria. There is only one way. Not because we imagined it as such, not because somebody told us that, not because it's fancy, but rather that's just practically how it is. There is only one way. And so I guess the major point is to say, look, everybody, take a look at it. View what's happening from this lens. It's a lens that's both ancient, and you can see it on Paul's lips, and it's a lens that is incredibly prescient of what is coming. And recognize that the things that we had been conveyed, things that we had been torpified to believe were simply ordinary, like having a home to raise your kids in, frankly, being able to feed your family, are not, and kind of have never been. But we were able to have this moment, 2-generation moment, the boomer moment, which they were born into that and have lived through it, and will probably die just at the tail end of it. So from their point of view, it was always reality. But that was an incredible bubble. And and unfortunately, we lost track of the reality of it. We lost track of the stake and the responsibility and the degree to which we have drifted from anything vaguely like truly being able to be people who are worthy of having that responsibility. And okay, so let me just see if I can finish. Okay, so maybe the kingdom. So then what happens is it's a recall or a remembering. I've been really playing with this word. Amniensis. And how do you say it? It's the Greek word for remembering. Okay. I need to like just repeat it over and over again because it's a little bit tricky for my lips. It's Christ, like remember me.
Yes.
And do this in remembrance of me. Mm-hmm. But also to play with, to bring together, to remember again.
To remember, yeah.
Yeah. So the call is for us to remember who we have been and who we are fundamentally. Mm-hmm. And to recognize that it has always been the case that we must become capable of being warriors, warriors in the body of Christ, and that the directive of what that kind of war means are the kinds of things that Paul spoke about. You're in the middle. You've got a 4-month-old child. They have the simple act, the simplest possible act of raising a child, conceiving a child, gestating a child, giving birth to a child, raising a child, is perfectly infinitely laden with difficulty. It's the simplest possible act and the most difficult possible act simultaneously, because it's the most meaningful act. Okay, well then that's warfare. Like, that's full skin in the game. That's full stake. Like, every choice you make will actually have, and you're utterly overwhelmed. And in this case, your adversary is twofold, or I guess threefold. One is your sinful nature, your own weakness, and the way that you will get in your own way. The second is the adversary, right? Constantly trying to separate you from what is right. And then the third is the complexity of the reality that you find yourself in, the fact that you're in a fallen world. And by fallen world, what I mean is a world where difficulty is just part of reality, really profound, utter difficulty. So it's funny, this tweet in some sense speaks towards hey, the circumstances you find yourself in are highly novel. The boomers can't save you because your world is not the world that they even are capable of truly imagining exists at all. And therefore you need to brush that off, step into it with an acceptance of the fact that this is a full stake, full skin in the game, no whining, it's victory or death kind of an attitude. And recognize that that is a highly spiritual in sort of the weak sense of spiritual, meaning I need to take care of my own emotional regulation. I need to take care of my relationships with of the things that don't seem like the kind of stuff that happens during wartime, but is exactly the kind of stuff that happens during wartime when it's real. Yet at the same time, the tweet is also saying, and this is actually coming from the point of view of eternity. This is just the actual core structure of reality as it always has been. And we are remembering that reality. And so you are called to wake up from a long dream and in some sense, therefore recognize that, and this is just, we're far enough apart, oddly enough, in age that there's almost nothing in common, yet our children are 1 month apart in age. Yeah. So in that, we're very, very kin. My great grandparents my grandfather actually was raised in a house that had no electricity and no running water. It was two generations away. He was raised in a house, no electricity, no running water, outhouse, the whole bit. And my dad would go and visit and spend time there in Crockett, Texas, which is to say the context in which they were raised was really rather harsh in comparison to now. Like, if you or I both found ourselves in a circumstance where we were trying to provide for our families, where we had an outhouse and we had no electricity and we had no running water, we would really feel like something truly bad had happened. Yeah. Right? Like, wow. And probably
especially in Texas. I'm like,
yeah, especially in Texas, for crying out loud. Like, Crockett's not far from you. You know exactly what this feels like. We'd probably say this is actually unendurable. This is not a real thing.
Yeah, like, yet, you have to move.
Yeah, this is and and who knows what, right? Living in a car is better than that. And in many ways, it actually kind of is, probably. But the point is, they totally survived, meaning it's within us. We have that capability, and that the material conditions we find ourselves in have never really been the point. The primary point is the spiritual power, the spiritual power that we tap into. Can we actually rest in the peace that is beyond understanding? If we can, then, if martyrs can be eaten by lions with beatific visions, we can probably get past the tribulations that we're facing right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't want to make it trivial at all. Right? The point is, in fact, you guys in particular, are facing a material reality that is ultimately a spiritual crisis, because we've been sold for 500 years a trading the spiritual reality for material abundance. That was the trade that was made after the 30 years war and the emergence of liberalism. That trade is breaking down, and we're finding that we have neither. And to respond, it's not going to be, let us continue to endeavor to pump up on the material side. but rather, can we migrate to the spiritual? Can we actually rebuild from that location? Because that's the center. That's the place from which abundance flows. That's the place from which living water flows. And then this is the place from which community comes. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I've said this before. It goes like this. It's like society over here.
Mm-hmm.
Society is actually necrotic. Society is the undead. It's the zombie, right? It's an actual dead thing. Like the bug guy from Men in Black. Skin suit, right?
Yeah.
There's community. But community is what you call it when society is what's looking at it. The real thing is communion.
Yes.
Communion is real. When you're in communion, you will naturally also have community.
Of course.
If you're out of communion, community is the feedstock of society.
For society, yeah.
Yeah. And so restoration of communion.
Yep.
And all that entails. So, I mean, in my simplest tweet, and I think I actually said this at some point. Maybe I said it recently. It says, like, what do I do? What do I do? I was like, at the end of the day, go to church. Like, it actually is really a call to do that. But the point is, we probably don't even really know what that means anymore.
Yeah, I think you could double click on that, because I think that's where the rub lies of what does church mean, you know? Like, when I first became a believer, I think, man, I had been a believer for a couple months, and I was in a Bible study with a couple guys, and we're just reading the gospel, you know, as if it's simple, self-evident kind of thing, and going through it. And actually, you know what? I think we were in Romans, and we're going through, and Paul's talking about, you know, believe, you know, and you will be saved. And it's like people just kind of go past that and act like it's self-evident what believe means, just like we go past it and we act like it's self-evident what church means. And yeah, kind of what you're saying is that's not the case at all. Definitely not now.
Yes.
If it was ever self-evident, that time passed a long, long time ago. And all of the issues that you're pointing to have infiltrated the church, to use wartime language, like very, very deeply, because they've infiltrated us very, very deeply. Like, I think the thing that stands out as you're speaking, and why the wartime frame seems obviously true to me, and the most useful way of looking at it, is like, I've always had this sense, and I don't know that I've ever heard anybody put it this way when describing Christianity, but the really simple, like, implication of the Christian story as it relates to our existence here and our lives today is that there is a war going on, and we are the battlefield. Like, my soul is the battlefield. Mm-hmm. Like, that seems to be the message, but it's not often the message that's preached, right? Like, we still often from the pulpit, and you hear Christian messaging books, all these things, especially from a generation that was raised, you know, I guess if you look at a lot of the most popular Christian books written by people who are still alive, it was that generation of people who only ever lived in this kind of material abundance. But the whole frame is like oftentimes a material frame, even when talking about the furthest they might go is like relational and emotional health, but they don't often, you feel like it's not often taken to this extreme of like, no, your soul and the souls of your children, your community are actually the battlefield in a spiritual war that, like you said, is in some ways more, you know, like to use the phrase total war, it is more of a total war. A spiritual war is more of a total war than a nuclear war.
Yeah.
Of course, a nuclear war is as much as it gets, like you said, materially, as far as it goes. But in some ways, you could be like one of the martyrs and say, like, I'm going to die materially. Great. You know, I believe that's, you know, a very, very small thing compared to the glory of God in Christ after I die physically. But the spiritual war is the total war. And as you're saying, you can be fooled, as most are, into believing what you see with your eyes. And obviously, if you really have eyes to see, you see the material disintegrating in front of you right now, but most don't, right? They see increased material abundance. maybe even foolish enough to view the AI revolution as just like a step function above that. Oh, great. It's going to be even better materially. You know, Peter Thiel, we're going to live forever and it's going to be the greatest possible society. Or even, you know, Elon might understand the threat, but he still has a generally very like positive view of we're just going to go to the stars and we're going to have increased material abundance. And whether he believes that privately or not, at least that's what he espouses publicly, such that the average person just says like, oh, great, GPT-5, like I can do my marketing and my, you know, creative work faster and to a higher degree of competency. And maybe some people are going to lose their jobs, but we'll kind of figure it out. Maybe UBI or whatever, all these things. It all just stays on that level, when in reality, like you said, we're at this point of criticality spiritually. You know, maybe the most prescient evaluation of this I've ever read, which is funny because and a lot of people have been talking about this in recent months and years because of how prescient it was. But Lewis, That Hideous Strength. I mean, it's mind blowing how if he could be alive today and see how spot on he was, it's mind blowing. But his ability to depict what this looks like through that story, and just the criticality of like in the philosophical version, what's it called, The Abolition of Man, which is also wonderful. He talks about that generation of men that would be the most powerful ever because it has control. A very small amount of men would have control over the future of all men that have come before and men that would come after. And that's where we're at in a certain sense of this technological place we find ourselves, but also cultural, everything that's broken down. It's like everything is compressed into this moment of Kairos. And yeah, to bring it back, it's like my generation is trying to do these very simple things that you just named and laid out in this moment. And we need resources and that's why you have to go back to Paul, right? And it's incredible to read his words and feel like they may apply, and they've always applied equally to all men, but they may be more necessary in a certain sense now, or in an ultimate sense now, than they've been since like close to when they were written.
Yeah, unavoidable, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Or unavoidable, and more like shockingly reminding you of the reality that has always been the case. I want to speak a little bit about the kingdom, because one of the challenges of those who land properly on the spiritual war is that they will then default to the other side, which is to say, I'm going to rope-a-dope my way through this life, and then, you know, get my eternal reward on the other end. And this is, I think, a pretty common thing, particularly in the American Protestant sensibility. And I'm going to propose that's wrong, theologically wrong, and by the way, also experientially. And so the way, right, the discipleship not only affords you the spiritual resources to be strong and courageous in the context of what is happening, and to see with clarity and not be self-effacing when you realize, this actually is war. Like, it doesn't. I don't want to how do I say it right? I don't want to say, oh, this can't be framed as war because it's not. There's no nukes involved. Like, really, I don't get to have I don't get to make, live in a nice house. That's war. Actually, yes, this is the key, right? Because it's full. Everything matters. Just gets back. Everything matters, and so first, properly sitting in discipleship is the way to get the spiritual resources to be strong and courageous in the face of the spiritual war that is endeavoring desperately to allow you to have survival at the cost of life. Like UBI is the most insidious idea, because it's going to give, in principle, everybody alive in the most fundamentally wrong sense. Basically, everybody becomes a zombie. You're not alive. You're simply surviving. But then also, And this is the thing. Now you can find that fellowship, right? And now you can do, because all wealth ultimately comes from human beings collaborating with other human beings.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. And so to say, what does it look like for me to begin to be able to have that fellowship and to coordinate and have each other's backs and be able to actually have solidity and confidence? And that's the way it has always been. This is going back to community and communion. As society falls apart, if we fall back on communion and we enter into proper communion, we are actually living in the kingdom, meaning we are not having to say we're living lives of profound being deprived. Rather, we can actually live lives that are quite nice, quite healthy, good lives that feel good, like to our bodies, to our spouses, to our children. And we can say, yes, this is actually, I went to bed and I felt at peace, and I woke up the next morning and I felt good about waking up. Like I'm not merely enduring aesthetically. I'm actually enjoying the life that I'm having. If you can find communion and then work it up into a community founded on communion, and there's a feeling of wartime fellowship, we're all committed, we're all in, we're all going to make this happen. And then, of course, I should say, every single other person on the planet who has that same vision is intrinsically on the same team.
So
Bingo. It's not just you and the next 100 people that you know and are close with. It's you and me intrinsically.
Yes.
Now, there's order of loves. I can't take care of you and your family the way that I take care of me and my family, not the least of which because I lack the wisdom and discernment to know what that would even mean. But a flood happened in my valley, right? My people were fucked up. And we were really, and we were not going to make it on our own. Good people from all over this part of the country and all over other parts of the country and all over the world, in their own dime and at their own time, came in and they took care of us. In our time of need, they took care of us. And many, many, many of those good people were on this team in a very clear way. The mission field is here. The mission field is now. So that's it. Like, that's the key message. The eternal is eternal for a reason. Orient yourself by that. Live by that. Notice that has always told you that everything is completely laden with full stake. Orient towards it to the best you can. It simplifies very quickly. Hear what God is telling you to do and then do it with absolute obedience. Surrender into that. The faster and better and faster and stronger you can, the better it will be, although there's a period of time where it's very scary. And then begin the process of spiraling up. And I should mention, by the way, for those who have the notion of Catholic or apostolic in their version of discipleship, if you want to start a church, what that would mean is contacting your local hierarchy and asking them to bring something to where you are. I don't necessarily require everybody to become a center of a church. My particular version of this, you can, but I'm not going to fight that fight because that is not the fight to fight right now.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's that.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, that's not the fight to fight right now. A lot of energy, time. People will get mad at me for saying this, but a lot of time and energy is wasted in the ecumenical bickering, and like that betrays, even wasting that energy and time and feeling like it's worth it feels like it betrays a lack of seriousness, like you said, that everything, like a lack of seriousness for the moment we find ourselves in.
Yeah, that's right.
Just that it betrays a lack of seriousness.
And we should actually, I want to emphasize, it's something like it trades 75% serious for 100% serious.
Yes.
Right. This is like virtue signaling. It's a tricky trade.
Oh yeah.
Because it's not meaningless. These distinctions are not meaningless, but they're not 100% serious.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's, maybe insidious is too strong of a word, but that's why it's such a trap. And why a lot of words are spoken, a lot of words are written, a lot of time is used on that, rather than, like, I really admire the way Pajot goes about this, of just laying out like, hey, I feel like orthodoxy is the fullness of the faith to the degree that I can understand it, speaking for him, and yet I'm open to the fact that God is doing things on the edges. And I think David Bentley Hart, I heard him recently say, Christ plays in 10,000 places, which is a beautiful way to put it. And just to say, like, okay, I'm not going to engage in the ecumenical battles. I'm not going to waste time. That's not, for Pajot. Like, hey, I'm going to go write fairy tales and try to revivify the culture. You guys can argue about Catholic versus Orthodox versus Protestant all you want, but that's what I'll say about it. Christ plays in 10,000 places. I found myself in this place. That's something I really appreciate about that. So one thing I'm thinking, and after having heard you talk about these topics a lot, and the fact that we both just recently had children, I'm curious, looking at this through the lens of a parent of a young child, and maybe even specifically, if this rings any bells for you, like the topic of education for a child born now to Christians in this place. And let's say we take for a given this framing that we've just been elucidating. What are you thinking? You have two young kids, so I know that you are going to put every effort into educating in a way that seems fitting for the moment we are in. And to harken back to what you said, most of the voices in education are coming from perspectives of folks that, like you said, have only ever seen the world that we've been living in for the past 75 years.
Yeah.
And so that's something that, my daughter's only 4 months old, but since before we were even pregnant with her, I've been thinking about, I've thought a lot about my own education and how just utterly mediocre it was in every possible way. And my experience over the last, call it 6-7 years of doing my best to educate myself. And having the capacity to do that, a greater capacity to do that today in 2025 than was possible 30 years ago, or at least practical, unless you owned a heck of a lot of books or had access to an awesome library and a ton of time. So there are blessings about this moment that I've experienced in my own educational journey. But naturally, the progression was, okay, maybe I can pastiche my way into some cultural inheritance on my own via the internet as an adult, and recognizing it'll never have the same effect on me, or at least not quite the same effect as being raised and educated in the fullest sense as a child in that cultural inheritance, cultural and religious and otherwise inheritance. But what can I do to provide the best possible version of that for my daughter and potential future children in this moment? So I'm just wondering what thoughts you have.
Well, let me work from the outside in. Starting at the outside, it has been the case, and I think it may have been the case always, but certainly has been the case increasingly, obviously, that the notion of public education is actually just simply a category error. That the education is a function of, let me just back up. There's three basic functions, and we've lost one of them. So the basic functions are state and market and church, or state and market and commons, or state and market and the sacred. We've lost that third term. And here's the problem. The third term is actually more fundamental, which is why the first two terms are collapsing. Without the actual substrate upon which they sit, which guides and orients and constrains them, they actually aren't real. They're not stable. Okay. Education is part of that third term. Parenting and family is part of that third term.
Yeah.
So the state should not parent. The state should not educate. The market should not parent. The market should not educate. And ultimately cannot, although you can fake it for a little while. Although in some sense, that's one of the reasons why we have the demographic collapse is because we've been faking it for a little while. Okay, so that's first, to kind of carve it out. Now, the second point is something like, and the formal structure of education, the image of education that we have received largely out of the late 1600s and early 1700s, which is content centric, around building a certain degree of expertise or competence in being able to participate in the economy and to a lesser extent in the society is not a valid form. Again, I think that's always been a bad form, but now it's not even a useful form. Okay, so that means we have to reform the image of education, and we have to remember the structure or the institution back. Remember, meaning bring it back into the category of the church. Here's the premise that I think is correct. What we're trying to do is we're trying to cultivate humans in right relationship with God. That's what we're trying to do. You can't create whole humans who aren't in right relationship to God, but that series of words is useful to kind of glue together. Whole humans have things like the ability to discern. They have the ability to hear when they are called. They have the ability to repent. They have the ability to confess, right? They have a series of basic capacities of what it means to be able to be in right relationship with God and then ultimately in right loving relationship with each other. That's actually the principal thing we're trying to do. Fortunately, because of the rise of AI, the content side and the skill set side of the equation has become radicalized. And this is the point. Like, you just spent 23 years becoming a doctor, and there's an AI that takes 90% of that, 93% of that away, depending on what you do precisely. Some 100%, some less. Okay, so that was a bad trade anyway, but now it's a completely absurd trade. But what does it look like for your daughter? For my son, by the way, that's the quick old, or my daughter who's turning 7. What it looks like is start from the bottom up. Learn how to become an actual human, a human who has the ability to care, a human who understands how to discern the right order of loves, a human who understands how to hear God and how to be obedient to God, and is able to see when a moment is being called into kairos and to step into that kairos with full stake and full commitment. In other words, a human who's capable of waging the spiritual war. That's the actual thing. And that can only be done in the context of a church, which is to say a community that is in communion, because it requires everybody that child interacts with to be always trying to do that same thing for him or her. Right? Because every moment of encounter, every moment of relationship is a dialogos. Right? It's
yes.
Two are gathered in my name, there and I am with them. And so then there's a moment for the presencing of God in the encounter, and that's how you raise a child. You open up these presencings, and when God is present, you allow that to settle into the body, mind, spirit, and soul of the other. And as they grow up, it becomes more and more natural. That's just how you do things in general. Right? So you want your child to see you doing that with other people. You want your child to be having those encounters with other people in the church. And you want your child to ultimately be generative and supporting in those encounters. Now, that's the center. That's the axis mundi. That's around which everything else is scaffolded and built. And then we can say that it appears to be the case that there's 3 rough, large stages of human development. There's birth to about 7, which is really about being descended fully into your body, actually learning how to be a human. Simple things like walking and talking. Other things that aren't quite as simple. Well, actually, those aren't simple. I just happened to have learned them a long time ago. Those are really hard. How to respond to your emotional state. How to feel things with incredible sensitivity and intensity, but without being overwhelmed by them. Right? That's the kind of stuff that happens during that period of time.
Yeah, you might hear my daughter crying in the background. She's struggling with that intensity of feeling right now.
Yeah. Well, my son has been colicky, so he's actually become really quite attuned to just being in agony and just screaming for hours at a time. It's like, okay, that's the thing.
Yeah, my wife has a really hard time. I'm like, gosh, the noise is tough, but my wife really struggles. It's hard. It's hard for them. Man.
Yeah.
Anyways, continue.
Yeah. So that second chunk, that 7 to 14, is this part where you begin to step into being a villager. Right? We have to start learning how to be in relationship with other people in a more agentic fashion. Right? The first 7, you're in relationship, but that relationship it descends to you. Your mom, relationship with your mom is your relationship with your mom. But your relationship with your friends is a whole different ball of wax, and you have to learn how to actually be what will ultimately be a member of a community. What does it mean to show up? And it means, like, how do you deploy these capabilities for discernment? How do you deploy these capabilities for repentance, for compassion, for confession, to resolve and step in? How do you notice where you can show up to support somebody else in entering into the right relationship with God? Those kinds of things. And then finally, this last stage, like when you imagine if we ordered it properly and everybody was committed to that And school was instead, or education was in fact actually just the life of people living together 24/7. And every moment was a continuous moment that you're looking and seeking for these opportunities for kairos to descend and to give what it is that God has made available in that moment. And so you're like surfing the efficient frontier of the divine economy. Then that last section, right? Section 14 to 21, right? This is now when you're becoming useful. This is when you're actually beginning to heed your vocation. You're trying to use all this capacity relationally with your peers, relation with yourself, relationally with God, to orient yourself towards that peace that God has apportioned to you. Noticing, by the way, that you are now also able to be at peace with it, right? You're not engaging in status games. You're not trying to figure out how to be successful. You're not trying to, that's irrelevant. You've noticed, you know that that's irrelevant, that none of that is actually matters. What matters is, can you hear what God has called you into? And then can you step into that adequately? Can you really fill the shoes that he is designed for you? Which is to say, that's how you become useful. Now, the beautiful part is if you can get these things in proper order in the technological era that we're entering into, your ability to really flourish into that vocation becomes really rather easy in comparison to what it's been like in the past. You can actually become we can build competence in autodidacticism at a very, very, very high level. And so when the time comes for you to actually become a master of some particular thing, it's something that you know that you've been called into, which is profound. Right? So you're able to really focus on it, and you're entering into these vocational relationships with other people who are also called into it. Right? So they're not just teaching you something; they are sharing the most beautiful thing that they know how to share with somebody who's growing into being able to perceive and appreciate the divine God showing Himself to them in what He has called them into. I mean, there can be nothing sweeter than that, and that teaches you so much about everything. And you're actually ultimately at the end of the day useful. Right? You're actually building the kingdom. You're participating in the good stewardship of this garden. So notice how I had to loop a lot of things in there.
Yeah.
Because this is nothing simple. Nothing ever was like disciplinary. Nothing is separate. Everything is connected. And if you haven't got the full context, then nothing makes any sense, and it all falls apart. So a big part of this is actually precisely that move. How do we weave things back together? How do we remember the wholeness of life so that we can take advantage of the synergy that occurs when we are living in all the different pieces that feed back on each other?
Yep.
Super not trivial, right? There's nothing about this. I can't do it, right? And I'm in a pretty profoundly superior resource position, both in terms of expertise, having thought about it for like half your lifetime, and having material resources that I don't have to, spend much time working. And this is very far from my capabilities right now. So this is a pointing towards what I hope is a destination that more and more people can step towards more and more fully. But that is the answer.
Yeah, and it by nature is not something you can do alone, anyways. I mean, you may be as well resourced as you possibly could be, in every sense of the word. And still lack the communion around you. And it's the communion around you and the intention or the realization of the seriousness of the moment that we're in on the part of the people in your communion, such that they take the education of their children, to use that word, but thinking of it in the broad sense that you just described, as seriously and holistically as needs be done, if we can even hope to get something close to what the vision you're describing, which has always been the challenge for 2,000 years. I think for some time, as I've in my 20s tried to discern my vocation, and my life has changed so much in the last 5 or 6 years, and trying to start a family, all while constantly kind of reevaluating, like, what is my vocation? What does that look like? And something, even just hearing you talk there, like the image that comes to my head regarding not just me, but maybe my generation, especially if you're aware of the moment we're in, is the image of like a ferryman. And my oldest brother, who's a very close friend of mine, and conversation, just one of my closest conversation partners. I would not be anywhere close to where I am without him. you guys would have a heck of a conversation. He's a blockchain developer, so I mean that's a whole. He's huge Bitcoin dev, loves it. So yeah, that's a whole other thing. But he said once years ago to me that there was a what he called it, like a almost like a straddle generation, or a transition generation, or a ferryman. He had this feeling that the millennials, call it younger millennials to older Gen Z, that is our calling and our identity, can be, if we live into it, a ferryman generation between what maybe the last 75 years has looked like into what our children will have to deal with and the world that they will be growing up in. Having been born in the 90s and still having genuine memories of a world where the only phones we had were wired, and we had like a desktop computer in our house and playing like Diablo 2. And if my mom got me away from the computer, then she knew I was going to be off the internet, into a world now where we have GPT-5,
hardwired into your Neuralink.
Yeah, exactly. And your car, your Tesla is everything constantly connected. We very much can, well, some sense, don't have the choice of whether to serve as a ferryman generation, but we can live into the highest sense of that as a calling from God, to do it in such a way that possibly leaves our children with the capacities to not just handle and survive the world as it will be in 10, 15, 20 years, but thrive and have life, capital L, life, like you previously said. And that might not look like even my own sense of vocation is trapped in a very 20th century, sometimes I struggle, frame of like, man, I need to have like the job that calls to me, and just recently, and it's like, man, hearing you describe, I think you and Ross Bird had a great conversation about some of this stuff, and listening to that conversation, it was one of the first times I was like, man, maybe my vocation is something I couldn't have articulated it months ago, but right now it's like maybe my vocation and our generation's vocation is much more this ferryman vocation of helping us get from one side of the river to the other without capsizing.
I'm gonna take that image and I'm gonna throw another one back that just occurred to me. So and I'll back up a little bit, because my generation, I'm Gen X, by the way, smack dab in the middle. I think I actually opened that tweet with that acknowledgement, that land acknowledgement. Moses. We remember slavery in Egypt. We remember
Yes.
the world before the Red Sea. We actually remember the world before the presence of God had been brought back to Israel. But we can come to the top of the mountain. We can see the promised land, but we're not going to cross over into it. The Pharaoh generation is maybe the Joshua generation.
Yeah.
You're going to be crossing the river, and you're going to be entering in, but you're going to be fighting to establish that promised land. There is a war, right? To turn back to the beginning, there is a war, and there's all kinds of cool images there. And you probably should have the ark in this crossing, otherwise you will be capsized. Et cetera, et cetera. Let me just throw one little piece in before we hang up here. This is a challenge to the church. This came to my mind because I was talking with one of my pastors about this yesterday. Education belongs in the church. That's it. So sorry, church, you have to. And I don't mean create a church version of a public school. What I mean is actually take on the task of education wholly, which probably looks a lot more like a homeschool co-op than anything else. So does, in the past, let's put it this way, in the past, real property was mostly the commons. Private property was relatively rare, in fact, quite rare. And crown property was the third category. So the king had property. Some people, mostly in towns, had private property. and everything else was in the commons, and it was governed by common law. The commons is the sacred. The commons is ultimately governed by the church, which is to say the commons, everything belongs to God, right? This is all God's land. All of it is God's land. And therefore, the church must also recover, it must remember its capacity and responsibility for helping human beings govern the commons, to revive the commons, which is going to be this weird thing. Churches are going to have to help members of that church have a place to live.
Yeah.
That actually is the case. And then we will find that the economy, the market, only makes sense in the context of the divine economy. So churches will have to set the context in which the economy is taking place so that the economy is properly ordered. This is a profound revival. Like, this is a wildly profound, and it's going to scare the heck out of Protestants because it's going to look a lot. It's going to look a lot like the medieval magisterium.
Yeah,
because it is. That's the last time we had that. Right, the last time we actually had it. By the time Protestantism emerged, we were already exiting a world where the church was actually playing its proper role. But that actually is the proper role because, as we say, the sacred is more fundamental than the secular.
Yeah,
it is ultimately God's property. It's ultimately God's money. I'm living in God's house. Like, all of this is that way, and and this is the thing, we have to order it that fashion. Right?
Yeah.
It's not a matter of choice. It's a matter of that is actually how it has to be done. So this is a big punt. If you want to, go back to people sword fighting over ecclesial issues, fine. Solve the problem of remembering a church that is capable of breathing life back into the commons and provisioning members of the church with right livelihood and with a way to live in a fashion that actually works. Then we can fight about what color hat the priests wear. How's that sound?
Yeah, exactly. As you're saying that, I'm thinking of just, you might call it step one. Yeah, the phrase beauty first. I'm like, if we can't even start with, or rather just positively, we can start with making our churches beautiful. And then as churches pursuing, and when I say church, in the first sense, I mean the building, but in the second sense, I mean we as bodies making what is privately ours, our little kingdoms. There's great conversation between Pajot and Father Trenham about marriage, where they talk about every man's household and every marriage is a little kingdom. It's our responsibility to steward those kingdoms in beauty. Yeah. And then as a church, to do that with our physical church building and with, as you say, increasing amount into the commons and the effect that can have, rather than the mammon's view of the commons that we have taken on of, oh, well, it's not my house. It's not my house. And so I don't know if I should really care that much about how beautiful the church is. And definitely, if it's not my house or my church, I definitely don't care.
Yeah.
Like, build it as cheaply as it can so it doesn't waste my tax dollars. That mindset is absolutely devastating to the entire project of anything like a beautiful commons.
Yeah, absolutely. And you could just think about it. That mindset is fundamentally a mindset that fails to recognize that we're at war and that everything matters. And any moment of indifference is a moment of giving ground to the adversary, which ultimately means a moment where victory is his, not yours. Yeah. Now, bigger picture, we know where victory lies, but we're called to something specifically in this kingdom.
Yeah. And recognizing that something like beauty, I mean, you could go on about this for hours, but we can land the plane, but recognizing that creating beauty is an act of war in this frame that we're talking about, right? Like,
that's really good.
Being a steward of beauty is an act of war. And I mean, in one sense, yeah, we're in a tough moment, but in another sense, like, I would say I prefer my act of war being to be a steward of beauty and a creator of beauty and trying to revivify my world in that way than having to storm Normandy. And risk getting shot in the face.
It's more fundamentally true, actually.
Yes.
Right? That's actually more true.
Yeah. There is a gift in being alive in this moment. And having, I mean, look, Pajot is a great example of what he's doing with his stories. Like, that is an act of war. He is, he is.
Yes.
Yes.
He is a 5-star general.
Yes.
He's a brilliant wager of war.
Yeah. I
All right,
think
brother.
that might be a good place to land.
Yep.
Jordan, thanks so much, man. This was a ton of fun.
Nice. Yeah, my pleasure.
Really enjoyed it, and just yeah, blessings to you and your family and your son's young life. I know you're not sleeping a ton right now.
No.
Neither am I. But I know you're experiencing so much joy as I am. This is my first go around, so it's been all new and just so much.
Oh,
Even
man.
just being in this place of like I personally, to go harken back to St. Paul's words about let the peace of Christ reign in your heart. Like I have struggled with that, having lost my job, and thankfully I've landed on my feet just in this past week or two. It's been looking up, and so that's been a huge blessing with some opportunities, affirmative answers to prayers to help us stay here in our community and continue to do our best to just grow deeper roots in the communion we've found, while still having our eye towards, this is a whole other thing, but considering we have family elsewhere. But basically the Lord has my wife's family in Minnesota is a draw that we could, maybe we'll talk another time. But all that to say, the Lord has just answered prayers in the affirmative to just provide for us in the short term. And all that to say, the last 2 months, despite struggling to let the peace of Christ reign in my heart, there have been so many moments of just beauty with my daughter and extra time to spend with her. And I know that it's been, I've had a little bit maybe of a similar situation to you, different circumstances, but having just extra time and not being at work all day, every day. And
that is unspeakably precious. So
oh my gosh,
if you had to be forced to that context, that's a serious gift.
Yes. It's been an incredible gift to just take care of her. And more in a sense, it's so much greater than I know many men experience, especially having to go back to work so soon. And so, praise God for that. Praise God for your son's life and your family, and blessings to you guys.
Yeah. Thank you, brother. Thank you.
All right, Jordan, I'll end it here.